The World Bank says both demand and supply side of the global commodities market has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I have Edward George, is an independent commodities expert. He joins me now from London for a look at what to expect from the soft commodities market. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Ted. And I'd like to get your thoughts on the soft commodities market, how things played out in the first half of the year and what you expect going into the second half.
Quite a torrid time all commodities have during 2020 because of the COVID virus. If you look at the three major cash crop exports of West Africa, cocoa, coffee and cashews, they've all suffered. Cocoa itself has been up and down. It did rise a couple of times in January and also in May up to over 2,000 pounds a tonne, but it's fallen sharply since then. It's around 1,700 a tonne now. And if you bear in mind that actually it's relatively high for recent years, it suggests that there's still a further way to go. And this reflects the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty about how the cocoa crop has been affected by COVID. If you look at coffee, we've also seen sharp falls there, around 25% for Arabica, around 30% for Robusta. This partly reflects the fact that some demand has fallen, but also the fact that we've seen in Brazil a very sharp rise in production expected for this season, and also this kind of lingering effect of what will COVID have on the incomes of people. People are not buying coffee in shops as much, but also they're starting to actually drink less coffee at home. And then if you look at cashews, cashews have actually become the largest producer in the world is actually Africa. Over half of cashews come from Africa. Traditional producers like Nigeria and Ghana have been overtaken by upstarts like Côte d'Ivoire, which is producing over 500,000 tons this year. But we have seen prices falling by around a third. In fact, they're down almost 50% in Ghana. And that is because 90% of cashews are exported raw from West Africa for processing in countries like Vietnam and Ghana and India. And we've seen there not only a drop in demand, but also factories closing because of COVID. So I think for these key three soft commodities, I think there is a real concern what is going to happen going forward into the second half of the year. It really is a story about international demand. If we see COVID having successive waves and really choking off growth and jobs, we're going to see these kind of commodities, demand for them falling and prices falling further.
Right, while the demand and supply dynamics are quite important, I hear you when you say that, but I would like to know how governments, especially in these countries, especially in the commodities in West Africa, how the governments have been able to come up to support these industries for these cash crops to see that, that they are doing well at a time like this.
Yes, well, I think one of the clearest examples is the recent Cocobod loan, $600 million, of which around $200 million have already been dispersed. And this is a special loan. This isn't for financing cocoa, the usual pre-export finance or PXF, which is around $1 to $2 billion. This is money specifically to support and improve efficiency in the sector. And we've seen money going into preventing swollen shoot disease, which is endemic and hugely problematic. We've seen money going into warehousing to improve the storage of cocoa. Between 20 and 40% of West African cocoa is lost. It just rots because it's not properly transported or stored in the system. We're seeing money going into processing as well. Ghana has managed to increase its grinding of cocoa up to around 330,000 tons a year, and there's hope that that can be pushed further. But for me, I think the most interesting is certain forward-looking ideas when it comes to cocoa. One is a proper database of farmers, their farms, their dependents, their cocoa supplies. This means you know much better where the cocoa is coming from, is it being properly produced, and can you provide support directly to the farmers at the beginning of the value chain. But there's also now a concerted effort to try and produce cocoa products for African tastes. It's often said you can't sell milk chocolate in Africa. Well, it doesn't have to be chocolate. It could be soups, it could be cakes, it could be cosmetic products, health products, all designed for African tastes. What that means then is if you suddenly have a drop in international demand for cocoa, you still have a local market for your supply.
It's a good thing you mentioned that particular Cocobod project, and I'm trying to understand for other cash crops and other soft commodities, if project-based interventions like that is the way to go.
Well, I think definitely it's needed for value chains which are very fragmented. In the case of Ghana with Cocobod, the entire system is run by Cocobod itself. Every bean belongs to the Ghanaian state as it passed through the value chain. But if you go to Côte d'Ivoire, there is a regulator who oversees the sector, but everything is done privately. There are thousands of pisteurs and traitants who go out and get the cocoa. And that means it's very fragmented, the system. There are a lot of middlemen who honestly provide dubious value and take rent and money from the system as the cocoa goes through it. And in the case of cashews in Côte d'Ivoire, the system has literally grown from nowhere. The cashew trees mostly were planted 20 or 30 years ago to prevent desertification, and they only started marketing almost by chance. So the opportunity to have a proper marketing network with fair prices and with controls over quality and abuses of the market, that is essential if they really want to get value out of these commodities and also give farmers a fair price for their product.
All right, now, but looking at the dynamics to pricing, and I'm trying to understand, when you look into the next half of the year, beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, what other factors do you think could also impact pricing going forward?
Well, if we look, it really depends on the commodity itself. But if we were to look at cocoa, for example, we are approaching now the start of the 2021 season, which will be in October. Now, the timing of COVID hitting Africa was fortunate for cocoa in that the main crop was nearly all over by the time it arrived. But there's been some impact on the mid-crop currently underway. And the concern is that if COVID does return strongly over the next few months, that could disrupt getting essential inputs to farmers. It could be fertilizers, it could be pesticides, and that could impact the main crop. We also have an election, a presidential election coming up in Côte d'Ivoire in October, exactly at the start of the main crop. So there's a lot of concern about how that could disrupt production. And of course, we have the ongoing story about internationally. If we're seeing massive layoffs of workers, people's purchasing power dropping, they're going to be spending a lot less money on luxury goods, particularly chocolate. So all taken together, I think it is a very volatile situation for the second half of the year. And I think we should expect not only volatility in prices, but definitely pressure on these key soft commodities exported from Africa, pushing the prices down because the demand is simply not there.